So when we're looking at the marketing for these two Mac Minis, the new ones with M2 Pro and M2 chips, you can see that both of them have the encoders inside, like ProRes encoding, H.264 and H.265. But what I wanted to know is, how good are these as video export, or perhaps like rendering machines that are connected to your NAS, where you're actually editing on perhaps another system, but because they are so energy efficient, you render the video project out in there, perhaps upscaling, downscaling, or something like that. Or is a PC for the same price actually better? So what we have here is the base model M2 Pro and then the M2, as well as a custom built PC test bench, which I have over there. So I built the PC within the same price range as the M2 Pro Mac Mini base model. But because I didn't have an RTX 3060, I was using the RTX 3050. After doing all the export tests, I was actually very surprised. So let's talk then, which is better for exporting videos and video projects, a Mac or the PC? And how much does it improve between the M2 and M2 Pro? I'm running a competition on these Mac Minis as well as this 13600K CPU. And if you want to get one of these for £1 or $1, then stick till the end of the video to learn more. Sponsored segment.
Looking for a cheap way to license your Windows? Check out Whokeys through the links in the video description. Make sure to use the code TN20 to get a 30% off. Paste the license to the activation settings and you're all done. This license is for Windows 10, but you can upgrade it to Windows 11 for free. They also offer Microsoft Office 19 license. Use the same code TN20 to get a 30% off. Check out whokeys.com in the video description below.
In terms of the PC specs, because that's very important in this equation, and if you haven't seen my best bang for buck create a PC video, this is the type of specs you would be getting for around $1,300, exactly the same what the M2 Pro base model would be. But we were using i5 13600K and RTX 3050. Now bear in mind, if you've actually seen the best bang for buck video, I'm recommending an RTX 3060, which would be quite a big leap over the performance of the RTX 3050. So I do think you can get a little bit more performance for the same amount of the PC, what I'm actually testing in here. But because I didn't have the RTX 3060 in the studio here, I was using the 3050. I thought I'm gonna give the piece or the Max even bigger advantage over this one. I was actually surprised how well does this RTX 3050 perform. But bear in mind, with the RTX 3060, we get 12 gigabytes of VRAM, not 8 like we have on this RTX 3050. So I did 5 export tests in DaVinci Resolve and Premiere Pro, because we know that Premiere Pro perhaps maybe isn't working as well on the Apple devices, and DaVinci is very well optimized, sometimes even better than Final Cut Pro. So we actually get like the best program for video exporting for DaVinci Resolve, and we use Premiere Pro as well, and we did that both on the PC and then Mac then. The first export setting or test, what I did was I loaded one of our earlier reviews on the channel. So this, what you can see over here, is an RTX 4090 review. Once it loads up, there we go. So there is a lot of things going on. There's multi-cameras, there's lots of titles and b-roll and graphs and all sorts of things going on the screen, including music. But it's not that complicated. There's few layers of things, but we took this clip and exported this to 4K YouTube settings on Premiere Pro. And looking at the results, we can see that the M2 Pro is the fastest in the bunch. It completed it roughly 42 minutes and 30 seconds, something like that. As you can see, I have done multiple tests on all of these devices just to make sure that there is not a single like exporting error where it was updating something in the background or something was interfering with the settings. I did it multiple times to see that if I'm getting the same result basically. And the M2 Pro is about 6 minutes slower, but the PC is slightly slower than the M2 Pro, roughly around 42 minutes and 40 seconds, 45 seconds, which is just 10-20 seconds slower than the M2 Pro. Now bear in mind the sequence is 22 minutes and 22 seconds, so the M2 Pro and the PC, actually both of them, are rendering this back pretty much at twice the amount of times. So basically every second of the video takes about 2 seconds to render back. Now this was the first test, and I thought that these types of results are actually going to continue but actually they didn't. Next test we did was another test in Premiere Pro. So we took the same sequence, the main sequence that we already had here, right? And then what we have here is the same exported settings already. This is a 4K timeline, but this export video here actually is an 8K video, right? So the timeline is 4K. It kind of has to scale an 8K video from a 4K timeline back to 8K. So we were exporting this to H.265, 25 frames per second, and the 4K timeline was upscaled to 8K UHD settings, which was VBR1 pass 120 megabits per second. Now looking at the results, the M2 Pro did it at 49 minutes and 36 seconds. The M2 base model did it at 51 minutes and 15 seconds, so not that much of a difference there, only 2 minutes. But the PC here did it at 30 minutes and 51 seconds, about 31 minutes, something like that, which is almost half the time that these Mac Minis did. And here's one of the first points I want to point out when doing these rendering tests. What I found is that the upscaling and downscaling on these Mac Minis M2 chips, both of them, they don't like it as much as the PC. The PC doesn't mind upscaling. So if you have, let's say, a 4K timeline, you want to export it to 8K, or if you have a 4K timeline and you want to downscale it to 1080p, whichever way I was downscaling or upscaling, I realized that the Mac devices for some reason are not performing as well as if we take the same kind of resolution and then just encode it exactly the same, then it was fine. Then we moved on to DaVinci Resolve and tried to do exactly the same thing as above. So we took the same, test here, and we tried to export it to pretty much as close to possible the same settings as on the previous test in Premiere Pro. Now, are the settings completely identical between the Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve in terms of the 8K export? I'm not sure, because I was trying to match them as close as possible, but in here the encoding profile was main 10, right? And I was trying to restrict it to 120,000 kilobits per second, which is the same 120 megabits per second as we had on the Premiere Pro. Now, I couldn't find the VBR1 pass kind of settings on DaVinci Resolve, because maybe it's different types of settings, or if you can help me out, let me know in the comment section below how to exactly match those settings. But as you can see, these were the settings I was using for DaVinci Resolve. Now, interestingly, when we were looking at the results here, DaVinci Resolve did it much faster, and I do think DaVinci Resolve is better at utilizing the hardware and actually exporting. M2 Pro did it at about 25 minutes and 52 seconds, and then the M2 had a little bit of a difficulty here finding out like how fast it's going to do it, because at first it did 27 minutes 48 seconds, then a little bit slower 28 minutes 4 seconds, and then about 29 minutes at 6 seconds. So it wasn't as constant as the M2 Pro, and that's probably because the 8 gigs of RAM is not enough in the system, and it constantly has to kind of clear the RAM, put something on the SSD and then kind of swap the RAM with the SSD. That's why we're seeing these results there, because if you look at the 16 gigabyte model of the M2 Pro, it was literally 3 tests and they all performed within 1 second. Now, when we're looking at the PC, there was a few options of the encoding settings for a PC, because you can go Nvidia plus QuickSync, and then QuickSync alone. So first I did an Nvidia test, and the first test was 30 minutes and 4 seconds, which is actually slower than M2 and M2 Pro. But if we utilize the Intel QuickSync, the iGPU inside the CPU and the actual graphics card, and let them both work together and encode them both together, so Intel QuickSync plus Nvidia, we got some really interesting results. 23 minutes and 25 seconds, and 23 minutes and 43 seconds, which is more than 2 minutes faster than the M2 Pro. But if you put it in perspective, it's actually almost encoding the footage to 8K in real time as you're playing the video back, because remember the video was 22 minutes and 20 something seconds. So if you're using DaVinci Resolve and your PC user, try to use the quick sync and Nvidia settings, because they will give you the performance boost or the biggest performance boost. And make sure you do have a K CPU or a CPU that does have the integrated graphics on the CPU as well, because that will give you a huge benefit even in exporting there. As you can see, we shaved 7 minutes off the time compared to just the Nvidia card. Then the fourth test was all about downscaling and upscaling, again to test how both of these systems actually utilize the encoders and how the downscaling upscaling works. So if you've seen some of my playback tests on the channel, I basically took a whole bunch of these clips and put them on the timeline. There's all sorts of different 4K clips, H.264 and 5 different frame rates, 24, 30, 60, 50, H.265, 4. So all sorts of different 4K clips. Then we have a bit of 5K and then 6K clips, 6K Red RAW, B RAW. Then we have, this is some more 6K clips. This is 8K Canon RAW. And then there's 8K Red footage, and finally 12K B RAW. And as you can see, it's split in half. It's exactly the same clips here, both of these, but the first half has adjustment layer on it. And on the adjustment layer, we have 1 LUT, 2 LUTs, and a bit of curves and stuff going on. So basically 3 LUTs, and then we also did a VR denoise. Now I know this is not the same as DaVinci Resolve denoising, but I know that a lot of people will use denoising in DaVinci Resolve, so I tried to match the DaVinci Resolve and Premiere Pro settings here. So I usually have these settings in DaVinci Resolve, so this was just an attempt to match the Premiere Pro kind of color grade and timeline with the DaVinci Resolve one. So I have this little bit of denoise going on in there as well that makes the picture softer, blah blah blah. Anyway, just to see kind of how does Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve compare to each other, even though it's not 100% compatible or like comparable, because the effects is not the same, but you know, color grade and LUTs, they are the same, but the denoising is not exactly the same. And now looking at these results, obviously the timeline is about 20 minutes long here, as you can see. And when we're looking at the export speeds, then the M2 Pro did it at 1 hour and 21 minutes, 1 hour and 28 minutes, 1 hour and 32 minutes. So quite a lot going on in there. Maybe again because of the RAM issue there, or different stuff that was going on, I'm not sure there, but it took quite a long time. As you can see, about 4 or 5 times as long as the actual video is. When we're looking at the M2 base model with just 8 gigabytes of RAM, 250 gigs of SSD, it took 5 hours and 6 minutes, 5 hours and 24 minutes, 4 hours and 51 minutes. So about 5 hour mark, over 5 hours to encode this. It's 4 times as long as the M2 Pro, which is just insane. Just to see again that the upscaling, downscaling and frame rate kind of thing doesn't work so well on the M2 devices. But when we're looking at the Windows PC here, that completed it in 54 minutes, 55, 53 minutes, 55 minutes, 56 minutes, which is quite a lot faster than the Mac there. Mac, 1 hour 30 minutes and 55 minutes. That's like a half an hour gain on the export, which is much faster on the PC. And that's probably just due to the graphics card there. The graphics are so much more powerful than the M2 chips, and because the actual graphics power isn't as powerful in there, the encoders might be really powerful in there, but the graphics isn't. It starts to lag behind there because the graphics is just trying to do, you know, putting all the color grades and stuff together, whereas the encoding is just waiting for the graphics to kind of finish, if that makes sense, in a very simple way. So the PC gets a huge win over this, and bear in mind, if you had a 3060, that will be even faster because of the larger video memory and the graphics power. And then finally, we did exactly the same test in DaVinci Resolve. As you can see, we've got the same timeline, the same clips, the same amount of clips, and the same clips have had like a similar kind of color grade. So the first half of the clips have the color grade on, and then the yellow parts here don't have the color grade on. And if we are looking at the color grade here, or the color grade nodes, you can see we've got curves, LUT1, LUT2, and then noise reduction on there. And then the results are interesting. So how do you get these two Mac Minis for £1? Well, here's how. I am raffling both of these away just to support the channel and just to give back for you guys something for, you know, subscribing and watching and things. So I have created a profile and the raffle competitions on raffle.com. And the reason I'm doing it apart from there is just to give a little bit of protection for you who are watching this or who want to enter this raffle or wants to have a bit of fun and put a quid in and see if you can actually win one of these. It's 100% legit. This is worldwide. Only thing you have to enter is go in the link in the description. You don't need to follow or do anything in the social media channels. Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram if you want to, but you don't have to. All you have to do is go in the raffle site, enter for £1 a ticket, and that's it. This PC can be yours. And if you want to win more or get more chances to win, get 2 tickets and so on. So this is completely up to you. The winner of this will be drawn on my channel as well, and you'll get a notification on there as well. But this is trusted site. It's something that gives you protection and me a little bit of credibility, so you can be sure that you can win something completely hassle-free, and this will be delivered to you at the doorstep for just £1. This is just crazy. I'm so excited that someone's gonna get one of these or both of these Mac Minis for £1 or $1. Check it out in the description below. The M2 Pro did it at 58 minutes, which is much faster than it did in Premiere Pro. Now, I'm not sure if the noise reduction effect is actually the same on both of them, but we can still agree that DaVinci Resolve is better at doing the exporting here, even if the same codecs there. 58 minutes, roughly around there. The M2 now did it at 1 hour and 43 minutes, which is so much faster than in Premiere Pro, as you can see. So if you're trying to export some ridiculous things in Premiere Pro with the M2, probably go with the M2 Pro or just use DaVinci Resolve because it's just so much faster there. Premiere Pro just completely doesn't work as well on the M2 base model. But then now, interestingly, the PC did it even faster than in Premiere Pro and 51 minutes and 5 seconds. But just to note here, this was with the Nvidia encoding or Nvidia exporting. We didn't manage to utilize the Nvidia plus QuickSync here because there was some kind of error, and in DaVinci Resolve it didn't work. So DaVinci Resolve just wouldn't have the, you know, QuickSync and Nvidia working together. I don't know why, but interestingly, we were still faster than the Mac Mini and faster than the Premiere Pro version. So we shaved extra 5 minutes or so off on DaVinci Resolve just by moving the project onto DaVinci Resolve on the PC. And our M2 Pro chips are about 7 minutes slower for the same price point, and the M2 base model is about 40 to 50 minutes slower compared to the Windows PC. So then what's the conclusion? Who is better at exporting the video, and should you get the Mac or the PC for like just an exporting thing? There was a few things that I realized. Number one, the Macs weren't as good with the downscaling and upscaling. They were kind of struggling with this. Like I mentioned before, if there was just the same resolution and you encoding it into the same resolution, it was doing a great job, especially when you're doing 4K or 1080p export. When we go into higher exports like 8K, they start to struggle, and perhaps the RAM is the bottleneck. You need to have more RAM in there, which makes the Macs like quite expensive. I thought that the PC is gonna actually get beat quite a bit compared to the Mac Mini, especially using the RTX 3050, which is the lowest card like in the list there. But it was doing an amazing job. And in most of the cases, the PC was actually beating out the M2 Pro base model. And obviously, if you are used to one of the ecosystems, like you like the Mac OS or you like the Windows, I can't convince you which is better, but it's just an interesting comparison to see if you are maybe starting out and you want to say, okay, which kind of ecosystem is better, then I do think Windows has a slight edge there. Now, you can argue with me in the comment section below. I'd love to know what you think there. But I think the upgradability and configurations that you can have for Windows is actually better. And all the graphs that you did see on the Apple marketing, you know, so much better than this and that, it only applies if you have some of the older Macs or older PC parts. If you're using the current PC parts on both like Even the RTX 3050 is not a current. That's like an older card, right? If we use something like a 4060 or 4050, whenever that comes out, then the, you know, obviously will be even more. But for the same price point, PC, interestingly, provides better performance for the value. Thirdly though, the power consumption. The Macs consume much less power, are quieter and cooler when it comes to power consumption. But in terms of money spent on electricity, that's not going to be a massive deal there. The price difference or the money that you would be saving on the PC or the Mac, it's not going to equate to loads of electricity unless you're doing like 3D rendering, 100% utilized, something like that. But even then, I think having an Nvidia card or something like that will be much better, because the price to performance and price per even energy or price per watt is much better on the Nvidia devices. You haven't seen my video on that one? Go check out the M1 Ultra versus RTX 3090 claims that Apple did, where we tested out the performance per watt. Very interesting video. But thirdly, I could see myself using, in some of the cases, the M2 Pro in the workflow where we're just connected to the NAS, and then that's going to render it out. Because if it renders in the background, or it renders perhaps overnight or something like that, it does do it very quietly, and I wouldn't have to worry about if it's same in the studio, and the extra few minutes here and there saved. But at the same time, if you're doing just simple exports like from ProRes to 1080p or 4K, H.264, H.265 kind of encoding, then I do think the Mac is actually better, because we can see that the encoders there are very, very good. I was just using something that, I don't know, videographers would do in general, like a wedding film or corporate videos where you have lots of different clips on top of each other. But if you're using it for like a business that regurgitates some of the bigger content for social media and just exports it to 4K, 1080p or something like that, then the Macs will be very, very good for that, because the encoders are very, very fast in there. So what I'd love to know from you is, if you had to choose one of these, which one would you choose? Let me know in the comment section below. For $1,300 price point, would you use the Mac for video editing or the PC for video editing? Let me know in the comment section below. But if you are a PC user or you're interested in building yourself the best bang for buck creator PC, then I highly recommend checking out the best bang for buck PC building guide in the video description below. There's a PC for you, whatever budget you have, the best bang for buck PC for your budget. Check it out in the video description below. Thanks guys for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.